The next member is the member for Bowman.
Of Bowman, Deputy Speaker, I rise to make the two most obvious points that have been clear throughout this debate since the debate on emission trading and carbon taxing began, and that is that we need to get the right mechanism and we need to do it at the right time. What has been put before the Australian people, and I don't need to go back into the history of misleading voters before the last election, I need to acknowledge, more importantly, that this has been a long and torturous debate on both sides of this chamber that's led us to this position. But the point I'll make really clearly today is that we need to get the right system for Australia because we are lawmakers here in Australia. It doesn't matter what the rest of the world is doing if we are doing the right thing for this nation. That is my job. It is the job of international agencies and international agreements to work out what is the right thing for the globe. I know with carbon, if I don't have a global solution, Deputy Speaker, we don't have a solution at all. My speech today is going to focus on where we are globally in that agreement, and then I will also look at the temporal elements around the timing of that, and I will look at the history of carbon negotiation, where we've got to, where have been the pitfalls, because I say this to the letter, Deputy Speaker, a year or two from now, we will revisit this debate and ask what did we pass and why. Deputy Speaker, the best comparison for carbon negotiation globally is most likely the trade negotiations that began after World War II, and they still continue today. We still don't have a worldwide trade agreement 60 years on. More recently, we've seen the poverty negotiations around Millennium Goals, again halfway to 2020, and we still do not have global agreement on action regarding poverty. So the point about carbon is a quick agreement and a dirty agreement doesn't get you any closer to a global agreement. What we know from international negotiation is that it's a trust-building, layer upon layer, meeting upon meeting approach that slowly takes you towards the solution or the destination, which is a global agreement. If you go back as far as those early GATT negotiations in 1947 at Amacy, and then they were in Geneva and Dillon, Torquay, Kennedy. They rolled right through Tokyo, and then finally the Uruguay round themselves, which began in 2001. Even 10 years after that tortuous process, no one came out and said, I'm dropping all my trade barriers and that's the right thing for the planet. Deputy Speaker, that's not the right thing to do in carbon. So the first point I want to address is this notion that we have to set an example for the rest of the world. We don't set examples for the rest of the world in anything when it comes to jobs and livelihoods of Australians. What we do is we negotiate with the rest of the world. And I ask what has happened since Copenhagen, what's happened since Bali. If we are this committed as a nation, where is this Prime Minister calling the President of the United States saying, let's do something together, getting in contact with Russia, Japan, Singapore, South Africa, the trade economies, bringing them together for meetings and saying, let's have a carbon arrangement? It doesn't matter to this Prime Minister. This is purely a journey of political expediency for a Prime Minister desperately looking for something that she can look tough on. But in Australia, of course, we know that the impact will be significant. We as a country, if we wish to lead on climate, must be doing so at every opportunity, not just finding a way to punish our own people. Now, that might be in some masochistic sense impressive to those that are looking for action on climate, but it does nothing to take us closer to global agreement. The fundamental point that has never been made by this government is whether us signing up to something makes other nations more likely or less likely to sign up. And the obvious thing is, if you set up a asymmetry in trade and in business where there is an advantage for other countries not to sign up, it's called the first mover disincentive. It leads to perverse outcomes where you perpetuate the situation. Why would another economy come together and say Australia's harming its trade-exposed exports with this carbon tax? Let's quickly do the same and remove the advantage we have. It's pathetic and it's ridiculous. This is the point that's never been made on this side of the House, how that occurs. They would lead us to believe from their Treasury modelling that every other nation in the world will fall into a carbon tax with only, the ink is barely dry on the agreement. They're only months or years away from a carbon tax. That is complete folly. There is no one on the floor of that Congress in the US that wants a carbon tax. Do the same in Japan. Go and visit Russia. Talk to Brazil. Show me the mining economies that say that carbon tax is the right way to go. You cannot find an economy that says that. With the greatest of respects to our colleagues in the EU and to New Zealand, our brothers across the Tasman Sea, they are not a mining trade-exposed economy. It's quite easy when you have consumed your natural resources to raise your hand for a carbon tax. It's not that hard to do, particularly when it's at about $1 per person per year. It's not a hard thing to do, Deputy Speaker. It's a far different thing when you're a commodity-producing economy where where carbon is actually attributed to the economy where it is mined, not where it's consumed. And I don't forget the words of those who were at the Copenhagen Agreement just 2 years ago now. They said 3 things brought down Copenhagen, and it's good to remember what they were. They said the first thing is that the nations of this planet didn't arrive at Copenhagen universally agreed on the problem. There wasn't universal agreement. The preparatory work had not been done. They had a ground rush where they got there with all different proposals, no less than our own then Prime Minister, Deputy Speaker, who came with his own shiny apple of an ETS, but nobody was interested. No one was tempted by Kevin Rudd's proposal at the time because that's not where the world was heading. Number 2, the leaders turned up at Copenhagen too early in the negotiation process. So, of course, the minute the leaders jetted in, everything was paralysed and all the cameras turned to the leaders and we got no agreement. But the third thing that was pointed out by those who were at Copenhagen was the obvious point that this is no longer a debate about who's got the shiniest apple and the fanciest carbon tax. It's now about what's right for me. It's now about, if I'm a commodity-producing, trade-exposed economy, how do I do it with other like economies? What are they doing is the first thing I want to know before I do something. And this weird notion that we cut our own hand in some sort of pact and hold it out and no one grabs it, but that's going to fix climate, is patently ridiculous. Every international agreement, Deputy Speaker, every agreement is a painstaking, slow process of trust building. And where is Australia doing that at the moment? We're not. We've retreated off to the simple task of having a carbon tax debate here in Australia, and we've let the rest of the world back away from it. And that is my fundamental point today, is the temporal notion of whether a carbon tax is the right thing right now. And I know that we are incredibly animated by this carbon tax debate, Deputy Speaker, but it does deserve pause for thought as to why we are the only nation on the planet having a carbon tax debate in 2011. I mean, is it because we have a finely balanced parliament? Is it because someone tapped the Prime Minister on the shoulder and said, unless you pass a carbon tax, we won't support you in government? No, nobody said that. The reality is that we as a nation, in wanting to do the right thing, have simply chosen a foolish course. A course of A, going it alone, and B, having a large and churning carbon tax for which the administrative and the potential for profit-seeking, for rent-seeking, for administrative overload and for corruption is simply too great for this chamber to pass. This carbon tax is clumsily designed, it's overly bulky, it's unwieldy, it offers none of the protections for the industries that we need to be looking after. And I don't care that those industries aren't voters for the Australian Labor Party, because at some point you have to separate yourself from your own political myopia and say, Deputy Speaker, well, they may not vote for us, but possibly it's the right thing to do for the economy and for jobs. I don't see why one job should be lost in the pursuit of a carbon agreement. I want to see the evidence that these clean, green jobs are going to occur. Well, let's look for a comparator nation. No better than Spain, Deputy Speaker. They embarked in the green economy just 5 years ago. Enormous investments into solar. And no one's pointed out to me yet, Member for Canning, no one's pointed out to me yet exactly how paying twice as much for a solar panel as you will 5 years from now actually helps the climate. No one's told me how paying twice as much now for a solar panel as Spain did won't bring down the economy just as it did in Spain because of this green bubble simply vanished at the time of the GFC. That enormous investment in solar has collapsed. And as Dolph Lomborg will say in his book, Cool It, there are plenty of agreement that there's a problem. There's plenty of solutions. The argument is, are we prepared to pay now for those solutions? And Lomborg himself talks about this being a $5 trillion economic problem, climate, between now and the turn of the century. Do we want to pay $15 trillion now to fix it? Or do we want to pay $3 trillion later? I can't tell you when that later is, but I know the solutions get cheaper every day. I don't want to be the one nation, the one economy that has a carbon tax in place in 2011, Deputy Speaker, that damages our economy and no one overseas will thank us. I mean, not the EU, that has a very, very light, almost imperceptible carbon tax, not New Zealand, because in the main we don't compete with them as a commodity exporter, and certainly not all the other major economies of the world. And I don't like to always mention China, but I mean their emissions, their growth in emissions over a year will be 3 times the size of Australia's entire economy. And I've used this analogy in the past for people that don't have the time to read all of these carbon publications, Deputy Speaker. It's a little bit like when we were kids. Nobody loved peeing in the pool, did they? But we're all in a pool together here. It's an atmosphere just like a pool is. And I tell you what, we're all peeing in that pool. We all agree it's a problem. We differ a little bit on just how bad for your health it is. But I tell you what, if there's an elephant and there's a bullock peeing in the pool, I see no point punishing the mouse. I'm sure we're all contributing to this problem, Deputy Speaker, but let's get an agreement where we're all talking. We don't have that. We're not even close to that. I mean, where is this Prime Minister stepping out and saying, let's bring together the Tier 2 economies, the great exporters of this planet, and bring them together for this discussion about climate? No, there's none of that. Too busy doing other things, like finding out ways to raise billions of dollars a year in carbon tax and then apportion them and distribute them as only the friendly hand of government can do. And Deputy Speaker, come on. We can continue under this Labor administration to find excuses to tax Australians. We've had 17 of them so far without a tax cut. And in the end, we have to trust them. We have to trust them in their benevolence that they'll distribute it appropriately. I mean, how much can Australians take in this servility to assume that all knowledge rests in Canberra? I don't care how much they collect, I meant to say, as long as I get a little bit back, a little more back than I'm going to pay. This servility, this sense that only a government knows how to distribute these carbon collections is a complete fallacy. We may not always have someone with the priorities of the current Prime Minister. I don't see why another $71 billion has to be collected out of those pockets up there, Deputy Speaker, over the next 6 years, in the time that the EU has only collected a fraction in their carbon tax. And if I go and have a look at the eastern US renewable energy arrangements, where they've only collected $825 billion amongst 50 million people, we're looking at around about $5 per person per year. That's 850 million. So these are token systems overseas compared to what we are potentially doing to our economy. The points that I've made here have been simple. We are moving too early and we are moving alone. We are nothing like the EU because we are a commodity-producing economy. Our competitors are not Switzerland and Hungary, Deputy Speaker. Our competitors are those that mine the iron ore and mine the coal, those that bring the natural gas and the other energy requirements to Southeast Asia. They're the ones we need to be looking at, Deputy Speaker. And do they move closer to carbon tax? No matter how many times you try and airbrush away the reality, they are phasing it back, they are delaying, they are issuing free permits, they are doing anything they can do not to harm their own economy. And that's exactly what this lot over here are not seeing. So we have the temporal element, and then we have the actual structural components of the carbon tax, which time won't allow me to go through. But let me say this. Huge economic impact with very little environmental benefit. Australia's system alone, around just a matter of hundredths of a degree of Celsius reduction. I mean, we're talking about massive investment in the billions now that I can't spend on hospitals and healthcare in order to what? Delay global warming by what? 9 hours by the year 2100? I mean, there is no solution without a global solution. And I would love to see an administration focused purely on that very hard and adaptive work to bring other commodity exporters with us. I don't have a problem, Deputy Speaker, being a leader in the field, but there is no point leading if no one goes with you. Reach out the hand. Let's see if there is agreement on this carbon tax structure, for which I severely doubt that there is. I asked for one economy heading in our direction in 2011. The frank reality is that there is not. I asked for one contemplating an economy-wide approach that hits not just 500 or 1,000, but 60,000 businesses having to pay or be compensated and not the added prices that will be imposed upon their business as a result of the removal of fuel credits. In my electorate, the waterborne taxis alone, the barges that serve our islands. It's okay to exempt one industry but not another, so they are paying more in their water taxi and vehicles are exempted. There's too many picking of winners. There's too many favourites. We've gone on this path alone and with no support internationally, and this is a bill that has to be opposed.
Order. The member's time has expired.